What if the war didn't end in Berlin, but was buried beneath a mountain, waiting? Inside a sealed Nazi vault, scientists whispered to machines, feeding them thoughts, not bullets. The Allies thought they stopped the bomb. But what if they didn't stop the idea? The frostbitten forests of the Carpathian Mountains had long been forgotten by the wider war effort in 1944, buried beneath the weight of the Eastern Front and the roaring engines of the Allied push from the west. But hidden in a valley accessible only through ancient mountain passes was a facility whose true purpose had never appeared on any Luftwaffe blueprint or Wehrmacht logistics report. Known only as Site 7, to the few who had ever heard of it, the installation was a hybrid laboratory and communications post, suspected by both the OSS and Soviet NKVD to be the final link in a chain of Nazi experimentation and advanced rocketry tied to the V2 program. Operation Hades was not officially sanctioned. It was born out of desperation, paranoia, and the growing mistrust between allies whose shared enemy was nearly defeated. The Americans wanted proof the Soviets had already captured elements of V2 design near Piedmont and planned to use it post-war. The Soviets believed the Americans had a secret deal with certain Nazi scientists to defect west. What neither side knew was that Site 7 housed something darker than either had expected, something too morally ambiguous for either government to ever admit to. The team sent in was small. 3 operatives. They had never met prior to this mission. First was Lieutenant Elijah Green, an African-American codebreaker with a background in cryptanalysis and wireless encryption. Officially stationed in London, Green had been working on decrypting Luftwaffe telemetry data when a strange pattern caught his eye. A rhythmic burst embedded inside V2 test messages, not meant for the general command. He tracked it to the Carpathians. It was his warning that launched Hades. The second was Sophia Calder, born Zofia Kalderwicz in Lodz. A Jewish linguist and former partisan who escaped liquidation of the Lodz ghetto in 1942, she had since become a ghost in Nazi-occupied Europe. Fluent in German, Russian, and Polish, she had worked with the NKVD on psychological warfare operations but never forgot that Stalin had signed a pact with Hitler once. Her loyalty was to the dead, her family, executed in Chelmno. The third was Alexei Durnov, a Soviet radio engineer turned saboteur, whose entire unit had perished during the siege of Leningrad. He volunteered for suicide missions after that. What remained of his face bore the scars of frostbite and shrapnel. He carried with him a handmade journal written in ciphers of his own invention, a habit that unnerved his handlers. They parachuted under moonlight near Tehuta Pass, guided by a Polish resistance shepherd named Marek who vanished before sunrise. The forest was deathly still. Green carried a portable cipher unit. Sophia, a forged letter of travel bearing the signature of an SS officer she had once seduced and killed in Krakow. Alexei carried explosives and silence. The outer perimeter of Site 7 was guarded by Waffen-SS patrols wearing unfamiliar insignias, black with a double helix symbol. They spoke no German. Sophia later suspected they were recruited from occupied territories, trained for silence and obedience. The team infiltrated by posing as technicians transporting radio components, bluffing their way past the gates with forged credentials and a few key German phrases Sophia delivered with chilling authority. Inside, Site 7 felt less like a military base and more like a monastery consumed by madness. The walls were lined with radio towers, cryogenic chambers, and what Green recognized as early telemetry equipment. But what disturbed him most was a room filled with human skulls, arranged by shape and marked with strange sigils. A pseudo-scientific mural claimed these were cranial echoes, remnants of what Nazi scientists called Überwang, inherited racial memory. The lead researcher was Dr. Heinrich Gessner, a name not found in any Allied database. He greeted them in perfect Russian and broken English, apparently expecting them. "The Black Swans," he said, smiling thinly. "I had a dream you were coming." What followed over the next 2 days was a disintegration of trust and reality. Green discovered that the signals he'd been decoding were not telemetry, but transmissions from human subjects. The Nazis were using V2 rocket signals to test neural stimulation, attempting to control thoughts through pulses. Subjects, mostly Romani and Slavic prisoners, were held in underground tanks, connected to electrodes, broadcasting their pain across frequencies Green had once believed were encrypted messages. Sophia found evidence that the NKVD had known of this for months and allowed the experiments to continue, hoping to seize the research for themselves. A letter from an NKVD colonel, signed with her own code name, ordered non-interference until the facility could be fully secured. Alexei, while planting charges in the Eastern Wing, discovered a chamber unlike the rest. Inside were Soviet uniforms, American codebooks, and disassembled OSS radios. Some of the Nazis were double agents. Or perhaps more terrifying, none of the three operatives had ever left their government's reach. Tensions exploded when Green confronted Sophia about the NKVD letter. She denied knowledge, but Alexei, who had intercepted a radio transmission in Russian 2 nights earlier, confirmed it. The extraction team was not coming. The orders were to let Site 7 fall, with or without survivors. Green refused. He had recorded all he could on microfilm and planned to destroy the facility anyway, even if no one would believe what he saw. Sophia chose to help him. Alexei vanished into the tunnels. At 3:11 a.m., the charges detonated. The facility collapsed in a plume of white fire and iron smoke. Green and Sophia emerged from the forest 6 days later, frostbitten, hallucinating, and half believing they had died underground. Soviet patrols picked them up. Neither spoke of what they had seen. Green's microfilm was lost during repatriation. Sophia was listed as mentally unfit for further service. Alexei was never found. But years later, during the Church Committee hearings in the United States, a single document surfaced, a photograph of Dr. Gessner, alive, wearing civilian clothes, standing in Los Alamos, New Mexico, in 1947. No official operation called Hades was ever recorded. But in the shattered minds of three operatives, the ghosts of Site 7 still spoke in static, encoded in frequencies no one dared decrypt again. In the fall of 1943, the Italian island of Elba, known for its sun-drenched vineyards and Napoleonic ruins, became a silent battleground. After Mussolini's fall and the German occupation of central Italy, Elba was fortified by the Wehrmacht as a strategic supply point between Corsica and mainland Tuscany. While it held no major Allied interest compared to Sicily or Rome, the island concealed something the Nazis would come to dread: the whispered songs of a resistance no one could catch. The group came to be known in Allied whispers as La Voce Nascosta, the hidden voice. But the Germans referred to them with another name, Lo Spettri Cantanti, the singing ghosts. At the heart of this phantom movement was Lucia Vanetti, a 19-year-old opera student from Florence whose dreams of the stage had been shattered by the bombing of the Teatro Comunale. With her father killed in the initial German invasion and her mother arrested for harboring British airmen, Lucia fled to Elba, where distant cousins ran a vineyard on the eastern coast. There, amid grape fields and sea winds, she found not peace, but purpose. The early resistance on Elba was fractured. Some partisans had fled from mainland Italy after failed operations. Others were simply deserters and disillusioned locals. What Lucia offered wasn't just leadership, it was rhythm, poetry, and an invisible language. Her uncle owned a battered shortwave radio, hidden beneath floorboards, and a gramophone. With these, she began recording encoded songs, arias and folk tunes laced with codes, troop positions, and sabotage plans. Using her musical training, Lucia developed a system based on tone modulation and lyrical substitution. A single lullaby broadcast from a hidden transmitter could instruct sabotage of a German supply depot, or warn of a patrol moving inland. Her voice, disguised through distortion and foreign dialects, became the ghostly soundtrack of the island's defiance. The first major action attributed to La Voce Nascosta occurred on November 3, 1943. German engineers on the northern cliffs discovered a line of fake artillery, wooden barrels painted to resemble cannons, complete with canvas tents and fake shell crates. These decoys had appeared overnight, guided by a false radio transmission that directed Luftwaffe attention to the cliffs. As bombers attacked the empty decoy camp, the real resistance blew up a German ammo dump in the valley. This pattern repeated. False broadcasts, dummy defenses, sudden strikes. The Germans never caught the voices. The SS brought in specialists to triangulate the origin of the radio signals, but the transmitters moved nightly, from wine cellars to crypts, abandoned barns to fishing boats. The islanders helped in silence. Bakers smuggled notes in flour sacks. Children relayed rhythms through nursery songs. A local priest, Father Matteo, rang his church bell in patterns to warn of Gestapo searches. German soldiers began to fear the locals, not because they saw rebellion, but because they heard it. Lucia's most famous act came during the Easter of 1944. German forces prepared to use Elba as a launch point for counter-raids into Corsica. In response, La Voce Nascosta broadcast a distorted choral hymn, modified to mimic a religious chant, that signaled dozens of small sabotage actions within a 6-hour period. Ammunition was soaked, fuel lines were cut, mess halls were poisoned with rotten flour. The operation, code-named Alleluia in Lucia's notebooks, crippled German readiness. But it came at a cost. Lucia was captured the following week, betrayed by a Corsican smuggler in German pay. Taken to Portoferrao, she was interrogated for 5 days. Her voice was unrecognizable to the SS, raspy, weak, broken. But they suspected she was La Voce, the voice behind the ghost songs. Her captors brought her a gramophone, demanding she reproduce the broadcasts. She refused. On the 6th day, German guards found their prisoner missing. The bars had been sawed with a wire hidden in her corset. No one ever saw her again. Rumors claimed she drowned at sea. Others said she made it to Corsica, where she joined the Free French. But the broadcasts continued. In May 1944, the Allies finally turned attention to Elba. A joint French-Italian operation, led by General de Lattre, aimed to liberate the island in advance of Operation Dragoon. As part of the deception campaign, Allied intelligence picked up the signal from La Voce Nascosta. Hearing the coded hymn, Dormi, Dormi, analysts realized the voice was offering coordinates of German emplacements disguised as abandoned farmhouses. When Allied commandos landed on Elba on June 17, they found many defenses eerily undermanned. Resistance fighters emerged from the hills, offering guidance and supplies. The battle lasted less than 3 days. German forces retreated or surrendered. After liberation, Allied investigators tried to track down the operatives behind the ghost transmissions. The transmitter was found in a ruined bell tower, hidden behind a statue of Saint Cecilia, the patron saint of music. Alongside it, a weathered notebook contained dozens of arias with cryptic annotations. The final entry was a single line, asterisk, a true voice sings even in silence. Asterisk. Lucia Vanetti's name was never found in official resistance records. The Vatican never confirmed Father Matteo's involvement. The French never identified the Corsican smuggler who betrayed her. But to the people of Elba, her voice remained. Every year on the anniversary of the liberation, the island's old radio station plays a scratchy recording of a soprano singing, "O Sol Mio." It's said to be Lucia's voice, captured on a surviving acetate disc. No one knows if she survived. No grave was ever found. Yet in the shadows of vineyards and crumbling towers, the legend of the singing ghosts lives on, a testament to resistance not waged with bullets, but with rhythm, faith, and song. The Atlantic in March 1943 was a graveyard cloaked in fog. Convoys crawled across the sea like wounded animals, flanked by destroyers that strained to hear the death rattle of U-boats beneath the waves. Among these desperate voyages was Convoy HX 229A, a supply flotilla bound for Liverpool from Halifax. It was a convoy that would vanish from memory, and almost from history, until sonar scans in 1992 discovered a debris field off the southern tip of Greenland. HX 229A was cobbled together in haste. 41 ships, a mix of oil tankers, cargo freighters, and ammunition transports, shepherded by a skeleton escort of just 4 corvettes and 1 destroyer, HMS Thurlow. The lead freighter, SS Barrow Glen, was captained by Miles Corbin, a British merchant marine whose reputation for disobedience had nearly gotten him court-martialed twice. He was, however, a master navigator with an uncanny instinct for where the wolf packs hunted. On March 10, 1943, HX 229A departed Halifax under radio silence. The German Kriegsmarine, emboldened by new U-boat technologies and code-breaking successes, had reactivated Wolfpack Sturmzone, 9 U-boats operating in staggered lines north of the Azores. British intelligence had a hunch the area was crawling with subs, but the escort shortage forced the Admiralty to gamble. In his final recorded log entry, Corbin wrote, "We are not sailing into war, we are sailing into its mouth." By March 14th, the convoy entered a corridor of storms. Fog engulfed the ships. Visibility dropped to under 200 feet. Communications between vessels became erratic. The Thurlow-S Aztec sonar malfunctioned. That night, the first U-boat struck. The SS Gwyneth Bell, a Canadian coal carrier, was hit amidships by a torpedo from U-615. The explosion snapped her spine. No distress signal was sent. Survivors, if any, were never found. 3 hours later, the SS Kildare vanished. No one even heard the blast. The convoy had walked into an ambush. What followed was a 4-day slaughter marked by confusion, misinformation, and eerie silence. Corbin, recognizing the pattern, made a choice that would later be called either suicidal or genius. He detached the Barrow Glen and 5 other freighters from the main body, steering them due north toward icy waters the Germans rarely patrolled. He left behind false signal beacons designed to draw the U-boats southward. 2 ships tried to follow and turned back, unable to handle the worsening storm. Corbin's gamble nearly worked. The diverted group sailed in blackout conditions, navigating by dead reckoning and ice flow. One freighter, Orion's Wake, collided with a growler and sank without a call. Another, Meriden Hope, developed engine failure and was scuttled by her crew to prevent drifting into enemy lanes. Corbin pressed on, his battered ship loaded with munitions and canned rations meant for the North African campaign. His second officer, a former lighthouse keeper named Elias Bean, kept detailed records in a waterproof diary later recovered from a floating locker. Bean described morale as held together by rust and Corbin's glare. They hadn't seen sun or horizon in 3 days. Radio contact was impossible. But on the night of March 17th, through a break in the clouds, they spotted what they thought was a Royal Navy escort. The silhouette signaled in flashing Morse, "Proceed. Safe waters. Bravo sector." It was a trap. The ship was U-765, disguised using a fake bridge deck and netting. Before the deception was realized, a torpedo struck the Barrow Glen beneath the waterline. Corbin ordered all lights on, a defiant act meant to blind the U-boat gunners, and to rally what remained of the breakaway convoy. 2 ships turned back. One tried to ram the sub and was destroyed. The Barrow Glen caught fire. Witnesses said Corbin refused the lifeboats and was last seen locking the helm in place, shouting, "Get them through, damn you! Get them through!" Only one ship from the splinter group made it to Liverpool, the Langmuir Crown, a Scottish merchant vessel carrying medical supplies. Her crew was frostbitten and delirious, and her hull bore scorch marks and shell damage. Their stories were dismissed as exaggerations. The official report said Corbin had disobeyed orders and led half the convoy into destruction. He was posthumously reprimanded. No medals. No memorial. HX-229A as a whole lost 21 ships. It was the bloodiest month of the Atlantic War. But what made this convoy unique was the radio blackout. No distress calls had reached London. Only fragments of Morse, scrambled by weather and jamming, had hinted at disaster. For decades, HX-229A was a footnote, overshadowed by its better-known cousin, HX-229, which suffered a parallel attack around the same time. Then, in 1992, marine researchers scanning for icebergs found something unusual: a twisted steel hull with the faded name Barrow Glen etched on its stern, embedded in silt 130 miles south of Greenland. Divers found intact crates of British field rations, rusted typewriters, and the remains of Bean's waterproof diary. His final entry read, "Captain gone, but he turned fire into light. They followed it. We survived." A posthumous inquiry was opened. Corbin's name was cleared, but his actions had never been officially documented. His own logs were never found. 1 year after the discovery, the Royal Navy held a quiet ceremony at the National Maritime Museum. No family members of Corbin were present. He had no known relatives. A bell was rung for each ship lost in HX 229A. Today, a rusted propeller recovered from the wreck of the Barrow Glen sits on a granite plinth overlooking the Mersey. Its plaque reads, "To those who sail unseen, in steel shadows, and steer others through the storm." Tokyo, 1945. As spring approached, the city had already endured months of aerial terror. Bombs rained down from American B-29 superfortresses, flattening entire districts into gray wastelands of ash and bone. Yet beneath the soot-covered rubble, another war was being fought, one not recorded in official histories, one led by whispers, pamphlets, and a fragile, invisible network of resistors who dared to challenge the empire from within. They called themselves Kaze no Ko, Voice of the Wind. A clandestine anti-militarist collective of students, monks, disillusioned soldiers, and civilians, they operated under a singular goal: to expose the lies of the imperial regime and hasten Japan's surrender, not to betray their country, but to save what remained of it. At the center of this forgotten movement was Seiji Hoshino, a 28-year-old Buddhist monk from the Zojoji Temple in Shiba Park. Tall, soft-spoken, and fiercely idealistic, Seiji had studied Western philosophy before the war. Once a pacifist lecturer at Tokyo Imperial University, he had been blacklisted in 1939 for criticizing Japan's invasion of China. After years of silence, Seiji found refuge in the monastery, where he began transcribing sacred texts, but also secretly collecting military leaflets, intercepted radio broadcasts, and first-hand accounts from wounded soldiers returning from the front. It was in the ashes of the 1944 firebombing of Osaka that Seiji made his decision. Silence was no longer a moral option. He reconnected with old students and allies, Shirori, a defiant printmaker whose entire family had been drafted into war industry, Daisuke, a one-armed veteran haunted by the atrocities of Nanking, and Kaoru, a Catholic nurse who had seen the suffering of conscripted Korean laborers firsthand. Together, they created a mobile press hidden within temple storerooms, beneath statues and behind tatami mats. Using stolen military ink and rice paper, they began producing thousands of leaflets titled Kaze no Ko, short, powerful screeds combining eyewitness testimony, critical essays on state propaganda, and calls for the emperor to sue for peace. Their distribution methods were daring. Shirori stitched the pamphlets into kimono hems sold in black markets. Kaoru hid them in medical bandages sent to bomb shelters. Daisuke bribed a train conductor to smuggle stacks to Nagoya and Sendai. Most daringly, Seiji used temple prayer wheels modified to hold leaflet scrolls. Spun by unsuspecting visitors, they would occasionally drop a folded copy into the robes of passers-by. The message was simple but incendiary. Asterisk, the fire falls from the sky, not because the gods are angry, but because men have lied. Save Japan. End the war. Asterisk. By early 1945, the group estimated over 15,000 copies had circulated. The Kempeitai, the military police, were furious. They responded with brutal crackdowns, arresting teachers, raiding libraries, even executing a Tokyo bookseller for stocking banned foreign literature. A 10,000 yen bounty was placed on the source of the Wind Voice. Seiji's network faced collapse in March, when a courier was caught near Ueno Station with a satchel full of leaflets. Under torture, he gave up Kaoru's name. She was taken to Sugamo prison, interrogated for 11 days, and tortured. But she never broke. Her last words to the warden were reportedly, asterisk, if you had seen what I have seen, you'd have begged to join us. Asterisk, she died under unknown circumstances. Enraged and grieving, Seiji wrote a new manifesto titled Asterisk, Ashes in the Wind. Asterisk, it was not just a call for surrender. It was an unflinching indictment of the warlords, bureaucrats, and generals who had dragged Japan into ruin. He exposed falsified casualty numbers, secret government ration hoards, and reports of impending American land invasions the press had suppressed. It was longer, angrier, and far more dangerous. The last leaflet drop was coordinated for the night of March 9, 1945. That was the night Tokyo burned. 334 B-29 29 bombers swept in under moonlight. Each plane dropped incendiaries, cluster bombs that ignited the city like a match to parchment. Over 100,000 civilians perished in one night. The flames consumed everything. Wooden homes burst into firestorms. People suffocated in bomb shelters from oxygen deprivation. Rivers boiled. Smoke rose in columns seen from over 100 miles away. Zojoji Temple was not spared. As the flames drew near, Seiji and Daisuke loaded their final bundles into an old pushcart. They scattered the leaflets across the streets of Minato, letting the wind carry their words into alleys and fire gutters. One account from a survivor, a boy who became a post-war politician, described seeing white birds fluttering in the burning air, each one printed with a phrase he never forgot: asterisk, truth survives the blaze. Asterisk. Seiji was never seen again. The official story listed him as one of the monks who perished in the temple fire. But in 1978, a construction worker renovating a sub-basement beneath the rebuilt Zojoji discovered a rusted metal case sealed beneath the foundation. Inside was a journal, handwritten, signed by Seiji Hoshino. It detailed the full operation of Kaze no Ko, including names, dates, and maps of leaflet drops. It also included a final page addressed to the Japan that comes after. It read, asterisk, you may hate us. You may call us traitors. But we loved this land too much to let it burn in silence. Asterisk. Though the government never formally acknowledged the group's existence, the discovery of Seiji's journal sparked national debate. Some historians dismissed it as a post-war forgery. Others saw it as the missing piece in understanding how Japanese civilians coped and resisted under total war. Today, at the foot of Zojoji Temple, there is a small plaque written in both Japanese and English. It bears no names, only a poem. Asterisk, in the quiet wind. A truth once whispered still flies, on wings of paper. Asterisk. April 1945. As Berlin trembled beneath Soviet artillery and the Third Reich crumbled into dust, deep in the Bavarian Alps a final game was unfolding, a game of secrets, science, and betrayal. Operation Helix was not a battle or a retreat. It was an escape plan, but not for Nazi officers or gold. It was for knowledge. For the twisted ambitions of a fractured ideology desperate to cheat death. The first whispers of Helix came not from captured officers or decrypted messages, but from within the British code-breaking hub at Bletchley Park. Analyst Margaret Rowe, one of the senior cryptographers working on Enigma traffic, noticed strange irregularities in transmissions intercepted from southern Germany. Messages bearing odd structures and rarely used glyphs, resembling mathematical notations more than military codes. Her findings were dismissed by her superiors as transmission errors or panic-induced sloppiness. But Margaret believed otherwise. She began tracing the messages alone, filing copies under a false reference, Helix 17. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the Manhattan Project had reached its fever pitch. While atomic bomb components were being assembled in Los Alamos, Allied intelligence was struggling with rumors that V-2 rocket scientists had gone dark. Several were missing from Piedmont, believed dead or captured. But OSS officer Raymond Cross, a physicist-turned-spy stationed in neutral Sweden, had intercepted a strange document from a German industrialist fleeing to Buenos Aires, a schematic showing a weaponized fusion model, handwritten in a script that did not match any known Nazi program. The diagram bore the initials H.G. Heinrich Gessner, a once obscure physicist who had vanished in 1943 after clashing with Werner Heisenberg. Gessner had advocated a theoretical hybrid bomb, a fusion device triggered by V-2 delivery systems and enhanced by neurological resonance, a fringe theory combining quantum field data and radio feedback from human neural responses. Pure pseudoscience, according to most. But Cross had seen Gessner's name before, in old SOE briefings about psychological experiments in Eastern Europe. As Berlin collapsed, Margaret's patterns finally revealed a location. Obersalzberg, near Hitler's private retreat. She believed a final transmission had been sent from an experimental lab buried beneath the mountains, disguised as a munitions archive. The message, decoded in April, read, *Helix stabilized. Await extraction. Berlin lost. Asterisk. Operation Helix was real. British SOE and American OSS formed a joint unit, codenamed Task Gamma. Their orders: penetrate the Obersalzberg bunker, capture Gessner and his team, and retrieve any materials before the Soviets arrived. Among them was Major Stephen Grady, a former archaeologist turned spy, and one of the only officers who had met Gessner before the war at a lecture in Prague. They entered Bavaria on April 29, passing through wrecked villages and pockets of Nazi holdouts. When they reached the coordinates, the mountainside appeared ordinary, until seismic equipment revealed a hollow beneath. A concrete door, sealed with blast bolts and labeled simply, Zentrumkern. Inside, they found a facility untouched by war. German scientists lay dead by their own hands. Dozens of files burned. But one chamber remained sealed. Grady's team forced it open and discovered something chilling: a vault lined with V-2 guidance systems, isotope samples stolen from Norwegian heavy water plants, and a prototype bomb casing, smaller than Fat Man, but covered in strange copper wiring and lead shielding. In the far corner, alive but weak, sat Heinrich Gessner. Gessner smiled when he saw Grady. "Too late," he said. "It's already been done." Over the next 48 hours, the team scoured the facility. No active bomb was found. Gessner was interrogated and remained cryptic. He spoke of a resonance engine, of thoughts carried through magnetic fields, of brainwaves converted into code, of awakening the weapon from within. They dismissed him as mad. But Gessner was not executed. Instead, he was quietly transferred to American custody under Operation Paperclip. In 1947, he was reportedly working for a U.S. aerospace contractor in New Mexico. Publicly, his name never appeared again. His research disappeared into classified vaults. Years passed. Helix became myth. But in 1951, during a secret subhearing of the Nuremberg trials dedicated to Nazi scientific war crimes, Major Grady gave a private testimony. The transcript, once sealed and now fictionalized for documentary narration, recounts his final interview with Gessner. "He looked at me with no fear. He said, 'It's not the bomb that matters, Major. It's the thought. Thought can be weaponized. You've seen it. Fear, obedience, faith, transmitted like radio. The Reich may fall, but if you carry the code forward, the signal continues.'" Grady ended his testimony with a warning that certain lines of science had no nation, only ambition. In 1964, a document surfaced in the Soviet archives, referencing Operation Echo, a Cold War initiative to reverse engineer cognitive resonance weaponry, based on recovered Nazi files. The Soviets failed. Or so it was claimed. Back in Britain, Margaret Rowe died in 1981. In her personal effects was a single sheet of paper. It bore a waveform graph and a single phrase typed beneath. Asterisk, Helix is not a weapon. It's a virus. Asterisk. To this day, no government admits Operation Helix existed. The site in Obersalzberg was sealed and later collapsed during a controlled avalanche. All known participants were reassigned or disappeared. Yet in classified archives, there remains a set of 6 encoded transmissions. They end not with coordinates or dates, but with repeated fragments of an unfinished equation, looped endlessly. Some say it's gibberish. Others believe it's a blueprint for something not yet built, or perhaps already built, but waiting for the right mind to complete the thought. The Reich fell, but the signal may still echo, coded in frequencies, buried in archives, embedded in minds. We opened the bunker. What we found wasn't just a weapon. It was a question we were never meant to answer.